Okay, so while the car is still on the ground, we're going to break the lug nuts loose. We're not going to take them off entirely, just maybe a half to one full rotation just to break them loose so that when the car's in the air and the wheel spins, it won't be that hard to get the lug nuts off. So we'll just take our 21 millimeter breaker bar here, and we'll just go into each of these lug nuts and break them loose. Next, we're going to lift the car into the air using a floor jack, and we will place it on a jack stand. So that's important to remember when lifting. So we're lifting here on the frame of the car that comes through here, and we're leaving enough space next to it for the jack stand to go. So if you lift over here with a jack, it's going to be hard to put a jack stand under there because the jack will be in the way, so just keep that in mind. So now the car is resting on the jack stand, and make sure that it safely cradles that part of the frame so that everything's safe. Now that the car is in the air, I like to take my electric impact or my air-powered one and just very quickly remove all the lug nuts. So this can help speed the process up quite a bit. With all the lug nuts removed, you can now remove the wheel. So here's our new control arm, and here's what the old one looks like. This was actually from the driver's side. I'm replacing the passenger side today. And basically what happens, these are prone to getting loose and coming out. And that's what had happened on the driver's side, and so without that firmly in place, the control arm was off to the side and causing some trouble. So I'm actually doing new tie rod suspension and everything, so I decided to change out the passenger side today, even though there's nothing wrong with its control arm, but with 130,000 miles, it's probably about to go bad. Alright, so we're under the car here on the passenger side, looking backward, and we took our floor jack and we put it underneath the knuckle here just to kind of hold this up in place, because the strut right there can travel down farther once this is all taken apart. And so anyway, that's why we have the jack there, just to support it, and we can lift the jack up and down depending on what we need. But first we're going to go after this strut bolt right here, and it's 17 millimeter, and there's one on each side. So you're going to want to put a socket on this side and then another wrench or another socket on the other side to hold it still, because as you start to turn it on one side, the other side will just turn unless you're holding it. So we'll go ahead and do that. It's a very good idea to hit this with the penetrating oil, liquid wrench or something like that. These can get pretty stiff. So I'd even hit it with this and let it sit for a while. And if you know you're going to be doing work on the other side of the car later that day, go ahead and spray those first so that they're ready. So here we have our wrench on one side and our impact on the other. You could also just use a breaker bar if you want, but we're going to go ahead and loosen this, turning it counterclockwise. Now if you absolutely have to, make sure you have a wrench on one side, and on the other side with a really long breaker bar, you can put it on the end of a jack and start to lift the jack, and that can break it loose, but just be very careful and make sure you're turning it counterclockwise. Another technique that works well, because these can be pretty stiff, is adding what they call a cheater bar, or just taking your breaker bar and adding, for example, the jack handle off of your floor jack onto the end of it to give you more leverage. So just be very careful when you're putting a lot of pressure on these. Make sure that the head of the bolt is square and it's on all the way, and that this is at a direct 90-degree angle, because with a lot of pressure you can strip bolts or you can break things. Alright, I broke that loose with a big long cheater bar and breaker bar combination because it was on there really stiff. But now you can go ahead and remove the rest of this with the impact, because this impact is not a very expensive good one, but anyway, it'll work. Alright, so now we can take that nut all the way off, and we're just going to push this stud through, or this bolt. And this is where you can raise or lower the suspension with the jack. This one comes about right out, so we were we were pretty close to where it needed to be. So moving along with the control arm here, we just took out the strut one, and now we'll just go after this 17mm bolt here. Alright, take that one right off, and you just take the support here that's going into it and just wiggle it out. So now it's no longer connected to the control arm. Okay, so we're going to go to the inside of our control arm here and take a 19mm socket on this side and a 19mm wrench on the other side and just turn them both counterclockwise and break them apart from each other. Okay, that one's on there pretty good. I had to use a big size breaker bar on this side and another one, holding it on the other side there. And you want to be careful not to cut up that inner tie rod boot while you're at it. But anyway, these are starting to come loose, and once again, one side will spin, so you got to hold them both and go opposite directions with them, which would be counterclockwise on each side. Alright, so when you get it pretty much all the way out there, you can take this nut off. And I'd probably just leave that bolt here. Just leave it in there for now as we go to take out this last one right here. Okay, so there's a pin that's sticking in here, if you can see that. And we've got to straighten it out by bending this back part where the screwdriver is so it's straight. And then grab that little loop that's in the top and pull the pin out. So go ahead and get a screwdriver down in here and bend this as straight as you can get it. Just have to twist it. Okay, a pair of needle nose pliers really did a good job to flatten this pin out. Then you're just going to grab it on the front end here and pull it through. Okay, go ahead and pull that cotter pin out. This one broke apart into pieces and it was a real nightmare. Had to break it apart and pull it from the other side, so try not to bend it back and forth too much because it does break. Just try to grab it and yank it straight out, and the more that you flatten the other end with needle nose pliers like this, the easier it'll be to pull it out. Alright, so we're going to put our 7/8 inch socket on there to take that off, but I want to move this line out of the way here in order to get the socket on there. So I'm taking this 12mm ratchet here, and we'll just take this out. Give us a little more room to work here, so it's just that 12mm bolt, and then move it out of the way. That's just the ABS sensor, it appears. So we'll just take that out now with a 7/8 inch socket. So go ahead and take this 7/8 inch nut off. Now the whole bolt spins as you take it out, and on the bottom it's flat, so the best way I know of to take this off is just with the impact, because it spins fast enough that the actual nut will come off. If not, you'll have to try to find some way to put an open-end wrench on the actual nut, and then find a way to hold the bolt still as you're removing it. But if you have an impact, this will work really nice. Okay, so once you get that 7/8 inch nut off, you can lift this right off of the knuckle. And so the only thing holding it here, well, just this one 19mm deal here, which we've already removed the nut on this side, so we just need to push it through like so. Okay, when you pull that bolt through, now the whole control arm comes right out. So now let's put the new one on. Okay, so then I just put the new piece over the stud here, and then lifted it up into here, and I ran the bolt through going this way, and now that's in place. And you kind of have to knock this up in there to get it to fit. Now I'm just taking the 19mm nut and putting it on the back side here. I put a little bit of Loctite on there just to hold it in place, keep everything nice. So I'll go ahead and tighten this down. Okay, so now I'm taking my 19mm on this side and holding it still on this side with the other 19mm socket there, and I'm just going to tighten this down real good. I'll run it on with this impact, which isn't very powerful, and then I'll torque it down with another breaker bar. Okay, now I just tightened it down with the breaker bar on each side. So I lifted with the floor jack on the bottom of the knuckle there. Make sure you don't tear the boot while you're doing it. And that way it brought this control arm up where it should be. And I'm taking my 7/8 inch bolt here with some Loctite on it and just putting it back on here. I'm going to go ahead and torque that down and then put the cotter pin back in. Okay, now I'm just running this on with the impact gun once again because it seemed like this had a hard time just spinning with a wrench, so the impact's a good way to run that on there. Okay. And that's got it on there pretty good. I'll go ahead and try to tighten it a little more with a breaker bar. So next we'll take our ABS sensor that we undid for a little extra room down there, and we'll plug it back in and wipe off any metal shavings or anything you have. Usually these are kind of magnet powered, and that's how it's taking its reading, whether the wheel's spinning or not, as it reads the teeth. We'll go ahead and put our 12mm bolt back in there, tighten it down, just make sure that it's going back down into that wheel hub to get a good reading. So go ahead and just tighten that down. Alright, so that's good and tight. Next, coming up here on the control arm, we're going to reconnect our sway bar link. Just pound that through and tighten the bolt. The other side, it will have a washer, then the nut, which we'll put a little Loctite on, and we'll tighten it down. Alright, so we just put a little Loctite on that, got our washer there. Just tighten this back down. And that was a 17mm, so we'll just tighten it down. Okay, the final step is to reattach the strut that's coming down. And this is where you may need to lift or lower the jack in order to get it to line up just right with that hole. Then just slide your bolt back through it and put the nut on the other side. Alright, so we just lifted the control arm and met it up with where the strut comes down, put our 17mm bolt through it. A little bit of Loctite on here, and now we're putting the other 17mm nut on the other side. So we'll go ahead and tighten these down real good and torque them up good. Alright, so we got our wrench down here that we're holding on that side, and then just tightening on this side. Alright, now just torquing it down with a bigger wrench on this side, and once again holding that other wrench on the other side. So now we'll move on to this part right here. Just put this knuckle back up in here and put our 7/8 inch nut back on. Next, just lift your wheel back on and hand thread the lug nuts, and then you can drive the rest of them on and torque them down. Okay, so all these are hand threaded on here, and so I'm just going to go and speed up the process here with my little electric impact. So then just pull the jack out and start to lower the car down until it barely touches the ground. And with just enough weight on it where you won't spin the tire, go ahead and torque the lug nuts down to about 95 foot-pounds. Okay, so then just torque all these to about 95 foot-pounds and do the star pattern. So you go from this lug nut to that one, then up, and just go across from each other.